I think that by going into the details, you reveal the real situation of what is happening in Mexico. As the comrade has explained, these 43 students were basically attacked by the local police in Iguala, with help from the police from the neighboring town of Cocula. And they were attacked by the police without any prior provocation, without any further reason or justification. Then the survivors of the attack were then taken away and handed over by the local police to the drug cartel, the Guerreros Unidos. The mayor of the town is part of this criminal organization, and his wife's brothers, two of them have been killed in drug war between different cartels, and the other one is currently one of the leaders of one of the drug cartels. And it's now been found out that the mayor was paying 6,000 pesos a month, which is about 30,000 pounds, to the drug cartel, and the drug cartel was paying the wages of the local police. So basically you see that there's no real difference between the state and the drug cartels, the criminal organizations, and so on. Now the next step I want to show is that there is no difference between the state and the criminal gangs and the political parties, all the established political parties, the 4 or 5 main political parties of Mexico. They are all involved in this. In fact, there is a joke in Mexico that people say, it's a bit of a cruel joke, but it reveals what is really going on. That people say that it is not very clear whether it is the drug cartels that have infiltrated the PRI, the ruling party, or it is the PRI that has infiltrated the drug cartels. One way or the other, it's the same thing. Now this guy, who's the mayor of Iguala, Abarca, Luis Abarca, he is a member of the PRD. And within the PRD, which is supposed to be a left party, it was set up as a left party. Quite a lot of people from the social movements and different struggles, trade union activists, youth activists, peasant activists, they came into this organization at its founding at the late 1980s. But then it was taken over by a bureaucracy, a bureaucratic clique called Chuchos around Jesus Ortega and another Jesus, and so that's why they call it Chuchos. And these people are this bureaucratic, right-wing, corrupt clique, and they run the party. And this guy, Abarca, is part of this clique. He got this position as a candidate for the PRD in this town to become mayor because he's linked to this clique at the top of the PRD. Now, this is not news to anyone in Iguala, in Guerrero, and in Mexico, and the state prosecutor's office. They knew about this guy, his links with organized crime, because there's been many killings. In Guerrero in general, Guerrero is the 3rd state where more people have been killed in the last period in the so-called war against drugs, after only Chihuahua and Sinaloa in the north. But 1 year ago, just to give one example, 1 year ago there was an opposition inside the PRD in the local town of Iguala. And there was a group called Iguala People's Unity, a left-wing, more kind of rank-and-file group within the PRD, and they had one member of the local council, Hernandez. And these guys at one point were threatened by the wife of the mayor, and they said, if you don't stop your internal opposition, we have ways of dealing with you. And a few days later, 7 people from this organization, rank-and-file organization, were kidnapped, and they were taken to a place in the outskirts of the town. They were tortured. They were forced to dig a grave, and then the mayor was present in this thing, and he ordered the shooting, or he actually shot 2 of them. Now 3 of them managed to escape while the shooters were talking on the mobile phone. They managed to escape. It was in the middle of the night, but the other 3 were killed. Now this is not news. These people from this organization and the human rights defenders in the town, they presented a report to the regional prosecutor's, state prosecutor's office, and to the national state prosecutor's office, and to the PRD. So everyone knew that the mayor had not only ordered some members of his own party, councillors from his own party, shot dead, but that he probably fired the shots himself. So this just gives you an idea that the state prosecutor's office and the national state prosecutor's office is also involved in this, or at the very least is not interested in investigating for fear of revealing things that could damage the state as a whole. Now, it is now the state prosecutor's office that is investigating the Ayotzinapa case, which is completely ridiculous. They're not really investigating. There's 10,000 soldiers and marines from and people from the prosecutor's office in the region of Guerrero. They've been there for more than a month now. They haven't found anything. They haven't found anything. And they arrested about 30 members of the local police force, and so on. I mean, but the whole is a collusion between the state, the prosecutor's office, the army, the local police force, and the drug cartels. They're not interested in solving this issue. And not only this, the thing goes even beyond this, because then the regional governor of Guerrero, Aguirre, who is also a member of the PRD, and is also closely linked to these chuchos who lead the PRD nationally, he ordered the arrest of this guy, the local mayor. But he ordered the arrest of the local mayor two days after the event. The local mayor was so so secure that he went to the local council, called a local council meeting. He asked for leave of absence, for permission to relinquish his post as mayor for a period of time. He was voted in favor and he walked out the door. And only 1 hour later, the regional state prosecutor's office arrived with the arrest warrant. It was all clearly pre-arranged. This guy has been allowed to flee by the governor. The governor then stayed in place. He only resigned about a week ago, or 10 days ago. But he stayed in place for 4 to 5 weeks. And you know what? When the there was a commission from the national parliament, went to Guerrero to inquire about what was happening. And then they met with a commission from the state parliament. And this commission from the state parliament was composed of all the main parties: the Green Party, the PRI, which is the ruling party and traditional ruling party of the capitalist class in Mexico, the PAN, which is a traditional kind of right-wing conservative Catholic party, which was for many years in opposition, then had 2 terms in the presidency, and then the PRD, which is this formerly left party. And they had a meeting with these local legislators. And the local legislators said about this incident, you know, in which 43 students were kidnapped by the police and handed over to the drug cartels. They said, here the solution to this problem is that we need to close the Normal Rural, the teacher training college, because it's a breeding ground for guerrilla fighters. This is the extent that the thing goes. And this is at bottom the real reason why these students are being kidnapped. It's not a random act, it's a politically motivated attack, as he was explaining. The Normales Rurales, the teacher training colleges, have a long history of militancy. The students are organized in the Socialist Peasant Student Federation, and they've been fighting. And this is not a school that you join in order to become a teacher. It's a school you join in order to become a rural teacher and revolutionary. The aim is to train people who will go into the rural communities to transform society, to fight for a better society. That's clearly their stated aim. And this is why they were a nuisance for the local mayor. Whether they wanted to disrupt his report or not, I think they didn't want to disrupt his report. But the mayor had reasons to think that they wanted to do that, because these are militant students that have, in the past, protested against the mayor, against the regional government, and against other things, and defended the continuation of this type of schools. Now, going back to the regional governor, Aguirre, when there was pressure for him to resign, the PRD said, well, if you force his resignation, we will go on the attack against the governor of Estado Mexico, the Mexico state, who is also linked to the drug cartels and criminal gangs, but belongs to another party. So this is like horse trading between the different parties. Say, okay, you are worse than me, and if you touch my guy here, I'll attack your guy over there. This is the extent to which the state is involved in this. The president of Mexico, who belongs to a completely different party, the PRI, has got nothing to do, apparently, to the regional governor. He took 10 days to make any statement about the issue, and he took a month and mass demonstrations before he met with the families, the relatives of the disappeared students, which only happened at the weekend. On Friday, I think he met them. And when the relatives came out of the meeting, they spoke very clearly. First of all, they said, when at the very beginning of this struggle for our disappeared sons, we were offered 100,000 pesos to keep quiet. This has been in the papers today. 100,000 pesos is 50,000 pounds, which in Mexico goes a long way. So this clearly reveals that the state, whether the state nationally is involved directly in the disappearance of these students or not, is in one way or another involved. They don't want the truth to come out. And they also said, one of the parents said, and me and Claudio had a bit of a semantic argument, because the word disappeared is used. And I didn't know this. I looked it up in the dictionary. And disappeared, one of the meanings of disappeared means this, politically motivated or enforced disappearance. But I was under the impression that disappeared is someone who vanishes in thin air, which is not the case. These people have been kidnapped, been taken into police cars, and then handed over to a drug cartel. This is a kidnap, you know. And one of the parents of one of the students, he did say, coming out of this meeting, he said, look, my son hasn't disappeared. He was taken by the state. The state is responsible. And I'm not coming here to beg from the president that he finds my son. I am demanding, as a Mexican, that he tells me where he is, because he's a representative of the state that's kidnapped my son. And this is the issue that's really at stake here. And this is what's made people so angry. And this is like, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. It's not the first time that police brutality has happened. It's not the first time that the state has been involved in attacking students. But this is the largest such incident of attacks against students, basically since back in 1971 or 1968, when there were two famous massacres of students. Ironically, these students were in Iguala raising money, as comrades said, to be able to go to a demonstration in Mexico City on October the 2nd, which commemorates the massacre of students in 1968, when an elite sniper unit of the Mexican army fired against a demonstration of students and killed about 40 or so officially. But I mean, these figures are not really known, and the issue's not been investigated properly. The state archives have not even been opened. Guerrero is also a state which was known for being one of the worst places for the dirty war in the It's difficult to know when the dirty war started and when it ended. It hasn't really ended, but the peak of the dirty war in Mexico was in the 1970s, let's say, early 1980s. After 1968 and after 1971, the massacre of the students, there were many who took up armed struggle. And in the case of Guerrero particularly, there were two different generations of people coming out of this same school, the teacher training college in Ayotzinapa, the people around Genaro Vázquez and the people around Lucio Cabañas, that they took up armed struggle on the back of two big massacres that took place when peasant communities tried to organize themselves, fight for their rights, and organize mass action. They were attacked by the army. There was a massacre, and out of this they armed themselves. Because if you think about it, when you're faced with a situation like this, in which the state and the criminal gangs are the same thing, what are you supposed to do? The only thing that the people in these communities have left is a revolutionary organization, but such a revolutionary organization must have armed self-defense. And if you want to know, in Mexico there was a President Calderón from 2006 to 2012, and he was the one who pushed this thing of the war on drugs. And during his presidency, 6 years, it is calculated that anything between 50,000 and 150,000 people were killed in this war on drugs. And it's quite clear now that, in fact, the state was backing one group of criminal gangs against another group of criminal gangs. And during the presidency of this Oh, sorry, one thing I forgot to say about the governor of Guerrero, just to give you an idea of the rottenness of all the political parties. The governor of Guerrero, Aguirre, finally resigned. He used to be the PRI governor in Guerrero in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when the PRD was formed, and the PRD was formed on the back of many of the militants being killed by the state. And Guerrero was one of the places where largest number of PRD activists were killed by the state. By this, under the watch of this governor, who then didn't get the ticket for the PRI in the last regional elections, and he then offered his services to the PRD, who graciously accepted him. So, I mean, this is the level of corruption, inbreeding, if you want, between the different sections of the political parties, the capitalist class, and the state. But in Guerrero, as I was saying, there's a long tradition of this. So what has been happening over the last few years, particularly in the years of the drug against wars, is that in different parts of the country, but notably in Guerrero and in Michoacan, the people have been arming themselves. The local communities have set up self-defense organizations. In Michoacan, they had such guards, I don't know, popular organizations that they armed themselves to fight against the local police, the regional police, the federales, and the drug cartels at the same time. And they were successful. In Michoacan, they took town after town, municipality after municipality fell under the control of the self-defenses. And finally, they were threatening to march on the capital of the state. At that point, obviously, the state intervened and used clever tactics to, one, arrest the main leaders, who are still in jail. So these are the people who are fighting against the drug cartels, who are arming themselves to get rid of the drug cartels in the towns, and the state arrests them. Not only this, because there's the issue of the monopoly of violence, which in a capitalist state is an important issue, that only the capitalist state must have monopoly of violence. And then they co-opted the rest, and they turned them into guardias rurales, rural guards, who are now, on the statement of one of the drug cartel leaders, they are 50% infiltrated by the drug cartels. This guy Covarrubias is now been arrested, so he's now talking at his leisure. And he said that the guardias rurales are 50% infiltrated by the drug cartels. In Guerrero, it's a bit different, because in Guerrero, the traditions of peasant struggle and revolutionary struggle are deeper than in Michoacan. And what they set up is this, what they call community police, policías comunitarias. And the community police, they respond to the people's assembly in the town, they respond to the rank and file organizations, they respond to the community, they don't derive any money for the services, but they are armed, and they are used when it's necessary for self-defense, of meetings, of anything. For not to carry out political activity in these towns, you need to be armed. And now the struggle in Guerrero has gone to the point where there's been a coalition has been formed between the students and teachers at the Normal Rural, at the teacher training college, the Democratic Teachers Union in the region, which is called CETEC, and a whole number of other organizations, including the community police. And they said that we're going to take over all the municipalities. They already burned down the state governor's building. They occupied a whole number of town halls throughout the state. And they said that we recognize no other power than our own, and we want to install a government of honest workers and peasants in Guerrero. And we recognize no other police authority than the community police. Now, it's not clear how far this will actually go, but the aim is clear. This is insurrectionary movement. But it's an insurrectionary movement that doesn't come because there's a group of, small group of revolutionary people who say, oh, we must go for the revolution. It's because the conditions of, concrete conditions that people face in these places force them in this direction, and to draw these conclusions as a practical thing. Now, it will be wrong to see, I mean, the drug cartels are now involved in a whole, this is just not running drugs alone. They're involved in all sorts of business. They branched out, and they're involved in smuggling of oil, in taxing people. That's one of the main sources of revenue. They go into a town, and every business, everyone has to pay tax to the drug cartels. They basically replaced the state in many places. There's calculated about 75% of all local municipalities in Mexico are infiltrated by the drug cartels in one way or another. Either the drug cartel puts the mayor, controls the local police. If the local police doesn't want to be controlled, they kill them and they replace them by someone else. And this is the situation in large areas of the north, but not only the north, but also the southeast of Mexico. They also branched into people trafficking. They also branched into migrant extortion. I was recently reading a book that just came out. It's called Todos Somos Migrantes, and it explains how basically Mexico has become the southern border of the United States. It is now more difficult for a Central American migrant to go into Mexico than to go into maybe Europe or somewhere else, you know. And these people, driven by poverty and unemployment and despair, they want to go to the United States. They have to cross Mexico, which is a very large country, as you know. They ride on trains, cargo trains, and other stuff like that. And there's a number of towns where they get out and they have some rest as refugees and stuff. And in these towns, they are kidnapped by the drug cartels. They are kidnapped by the regional police, by the state police, by different municipal police. They searched, and when the contact details or the mobile phones, they find contact details for their relatives either back in their home countries or in the United States, then they are contacted and they ask for ransom of $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, and if they don't pay, they're killed. And there's been large groups, 70 people being kidnapped, killed and decapitated, and the methods of these cartels and the state are becoming more and more brutal as they go along. In fact, one detail has not been mentioned, one of the students was found, one of the Ayotzinapa students was found dead, but his whole face had been ripped off, and so you could see his skull. I mean, this is really the barbarism of capitalism is driving a country like Mexico. But it would be wrong to think that this is just some criminal gangs. We already said that the criminal gangs are linked to the Mexican state and the Mexican political setup. But it's not only this. As the comrade said, this is a capitalist enterprise. It's only one that operates mostly outside the law, where you can get a higher rate of profit. And you can deal with your business rivals in a more effective way, so to speak. But this is a key capitalist enterprise. And you know, drug running is big business. It's one of the biggest money revenue sources in the world, behind only arms trading. And so this couldn't happen without big banks and big business being involved. And I'm not just saying this has been proven. There's at least 3 major banks that have been fined by the US authorities for collaborating in money laundering. And these banks are, they're not small banks, they are Wachovia, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and HSBC. In fact, HSBC was fined $1.9 billion, agreed to settle for $1.9 billion for their part in money laundering in between Mexico and the United States. And this is not small amount. This is a large amount of money. I can go into some of the details, but I don't have the time. But this is a huge thing. And obviously, none of this is separate from the attacks that the ruling class in Mexico, spurred by the international capitalists, mainly in the United States, but also in Europe, have been implementing against the Mexican people for the last maybe 20 years. I mean, you could say that the signing of the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, was like kind of a turning point. More or less, up until that time, you had a very peculiar setup in Mexico, where the regime that was in power, the PRI that ruled for, I don't know how long, 60, 70 years, the PRI had its roots, one way or another, in the Mexican Revolution. It was a counter-revolutionary party of the state and the capitalist class, but it had some roots in the Mexican Revolution, to the extent that the Mexican Revolution was a bourgeois revolution, but went beyond. I mean, it was carried out by the peasants, by the workers, and it acquired a revolutionary character that was threatening the rule of the bourgeoisie. So the ruling class in Mexico was so weak at that time that they couldn't smash the revolution. They had to co-opt it. So you had the emergence of corporatist trade unions, peasant organizations that were linked to the ruling party, and many of the gains of the revolution were inscribed in the constitution. Labor rights, land tenure rights, and a whole number of other things. The nationalization of oil, which was carried out by Lázaro Cárdenas in 1938, and a whole number of things were part of the tradition of Mexico. And this was a reactionary government that ruled through a combination of co-option, concessions, and brutal repression. And you found actually in many cases people who used to come from the Maoist movement maybe now becoming part of the state apparatus in the 1970s, in the 1980s. But from the early 1990s there was a complete change. The ruling class could no longer afford these concessions, and they launched an all-out assault, which was called neoliberalism. An all-out assault on the gains of the revolution. It took them 20 years because these gains are very ingrained in the mind of millions of people in Mexico. And first of all, the free trade agreement with the United States and America destroyed the Mexican countryside, because the Mexican countryside is much less productive than the US agro-businesses, capitalist agriculture, which receives multi-million subsidies but uses much more modern means of production, and this destroyed the countryside. They forced the migration of millions of people to the cities in the north where the assembly plants were set up, and to the United States itself. It's all a combined process. And it also destroyed, left large swathes of the land empty, idle, which then was used by the drug cartels to start the cultivation of marijuana in a large scale. And this was more or less the beginning of this business. It's all linked up. But in fact, the interesting thing is that they didn't manage to destroy many of these things. Many different governments tried and attempted, including the Calderón government, but they couldn't destroy many of these things. And now it seemed that with the Peña Nieto government, which is the darling of the capitalists, you read now today The Economist, the Wall Street Journal, and the Financial Times, they're all worried about the Ayotzinapa students and what this means for lawlessness in Mexico. But they forgot to say that just a few months ago they were praising Peña Nieto, the reformer, the modernizer, the one who's bringing Mexico into the 21st century, doing away with corruption and red tape, bureaucracy. You know what that means. It means opening up the country for the exploitation of multinational companies. And in a very short space of time, he managed to get through a whole number of reforms. The reform of the land property that allows for land to be broken up and privatized and sold to Canadian mining multinationals. He passed the reform of the labor law. Yeah, Canadian multinational, you see, Canadian mining multinationals, our Canadian comrade here knows about the issue. They are involved in Mexico. And in fact, some of these community police, they're also fighting against the Canadian multinational, mining multinationals that they have armed groups of thugs to protect their interests and to destroy the local communities. They have to arm themselves. So this is not just about criminal gangs, or rather, the dividing line between criminal gangs and capitalist corporations doesn't exist. It blurs into non-existence. So Peña Nieto managed, and in the last months of Calderón, they managed to reform the labor law, they managed to reform the pension system, they managed to reform the social security system, they managed to introduce the education reform. All these reforms should be understood as counter-reforms, obviously, as Claudio said. Despite big protest and oppositions by the Democratic Teachers Union, they managed to smash the Electricians Union, which was one of the strongest, most militant trade unions in the country. They managed to, a whole number of, and finally, now they passed the opening up of the oil industry, as so-called, which means the opening up for multinational investment, or rather pillage, looting. So it seemed that this government was almost unopposed going forward with all these things. And there was an accumulation of rage. People were really angry at these things happening. But I think that the problem was that the different struggles that were taking place against this were mostly either isolated. For instance, the electricians' union was smashed because they fought back, and they're still in resistance. They were 5 years later, but their company has been destroyed. It doesn't exist anymore. The contract has been, the collective bargaining has been destroyed. The Democratic Teachers Union, they fought. They had a planton, tent city in the Zocalo Square in Mexico City for months, and finally they just were smashed, were defeated, because the struggle was isolated. All these different struggles did not link up one with another. And then the other element in this was Andrés Manuel López Obrador and Morena, the new political party that was emerged as a kind of split off from the PRD when the PRD was dominated by the bureaucracy, that first raised the expectations of millions of people, and they led three important struggles against election fraud, particularly in 2006, which coincided with the Oaxaca uprising around the teachers' union. But that struggle was a huge struggle. It had insurrectionary proportions, revolutionary potential. I mean, 2 million people camped out in the center of Mexico City for 2 months or 8 weeks. And at one point, López Obrador said, this is not just a struggle against the Federal Electoral Commission, this is a struggle against the whole system. But then nothing happened. And there's only so much time that you can have people staying in a square without any perspective for the struggle. What should have happened at that time is the calling of a national strike. Even a 24-hour general strike will have been a good beginning for the struggle to go a higher level, to paralyze capitalist production and hit them where it hurts. And that was not done. At that time, there was an opinion poll that said that 25% of the people in Mexico were prepared to participate in an armed insurrection. Now, and 60% were prepared to participate in an insurrection against the government. I mean, normally, even at the point where the revolution is taking place, people do not say, if asked by the phone or in the doorstep, are you prepared to participate in an armed session? Yes, thank you very much. That's not what people say. It just reveals the amount of anger, what was possible at that time. But then, at the last minute, López Obrador, in my opinion, was not up to the task. And instead of escalating the struggle, he kind of said, well, on the 1st of December, we're going to have a big demonstration, and then the whole thing dissipated because there was no perspective. The same thing happened now with the privatization of oil. López Obrador 1 year ago called some big demonstrations, huge demonstrations. People marched from all over the country to Mexico City. They had a huge assembly, they called it, hundreds of thousands, and they pledged not to allow oil to be privatized. And then López Obrador proposed a plan of struggle which consisted in another demonstration in 15 days, another demonstration in a month's time, and people didn't much see the point of this. There wasn't a clear strategy. But now the thing is a bit different, because the accumulation of all this anger, this also coincided with the struggle of the Polytechnic students fighting against the downgrading of their education, which is part of the same package of attacks, because the capitalist class do not want highly trained and skilled engineers. They want cheap labor. People who are electricians who can who know how to fix a light bulb or a machine or something. You know, they don't want and they want to downgrade the education system. So there was a big, there is already still a big struggle of the Polytechnic students. This coincides with the Ayotzinapa movement. The students have given themselves a national inter-university assembly representing 80 different higher education institutions. They linked up. And there's talk now about the calling of a national strike. Now, I am not sure whether the people behind this, i.e. the students and the people in Guerrero, have the necessary force, strength to actually make this happen, a national strike. But the intention is the correct, and the strategy is correct. You need to escalate your struggle. If you continue repeating the same action, you'll be worn out, and the struggle will dissipate. But the people in Mexico are very angry. I can see they are on edge, basically. Just a few months ago, there was another big incident in Tlatlaya. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Tlatlaya. There was a place where 26 people, I think, 26 youngsters were killed by the army in a warehouse. And the army said that this was a shootout between a drug criminal gang and the army. But then truth started to emerge, that these people were killed when they were already arrested. Most of them were shot at close range by these army soldiers. And then it emerged that most of these people were not were part of this drug cartel, but they had been kidnapped from their communities and forced to work for the drug cartel, which happens quite often. And then they arrested some soldiers over this question, they're charging them. But the soldiers said, hey, just a minute, we've just been made scapegoats. I mean, the soldiers don't shoot at people, just, I mean, there is a chain of command here, you know, I mean, our officers are responsible for this as well. And so the whole thing is completely rotten. And what is being questioned now is not just this one drug cartel or this one incident of violence. Obviously, as people want to find out where these people, where these students are, whether they've been taken, whether they're dead or alive. But it's also more and more questioning of the whole capitalist system, because it is the state, the political parties, the businessmen, the multinational companies, the US imperialism, it's all linked up. And in fact, there's no other way out than the overthrow of capitalism in Mexico. And right now one can say, look, but I mean, this is a big task, and there's no conditions for this. And all these struggles have been defeated. But I think that it's very interesting that this struggle has come mainly from the youth, the new generation that came into politics, some of them through the I Am 132 movement 3 or 4 years back, against the struggle against electoral fraud, and people are starting to question more and more. Even the polytechnic students, which started on a very narrow program of their own academic demands, they're now linking up with the Ayotzinapa movement, and they're questioning more generally. They're very suspicious of any concessions made by the government. They want everything in writing. They want a public dialogue to be held and all that stuff. So the situation in Mexico is, I will say, potentially revolutionary, and really the only thing that is missing is a revolutionary leadership with enough roots in the workers' movement, in the peasant movement, in the youth, that can pull all the threads together and move them forward. Even without that, this movement can still go much higher, particularly, I will say, in Guerrero. And then the government is in a very tight spot, because what are they going to do? I mean, they're hoping that this issue will just go away, the people will forget, and this will be just one more massacre. I mean, there's been 23,000 people disappeared, 150,000 people killed in the war on drugs, and so they're just hoping that the issue will go away. But I mean, it's either the students are alive or the students are being killed. If they've been killed, the state is responsible. If they're still alive, the state is complicit in holding them against their will. Whatever the situation, there's no real solution for the state that they can wash their hands. And if they haven't found them 1 month later, it means that they cannot reveal where they are, because they are deeply involved. There's people in the ruling party, in the other parties, and in the state deeply involved in what happened to these students. So when this finally emerges, if it does, this in itself can provoke an explosion of anger everywhere. I mean, these mobilizations have not been just in Mexico City, where there's been the biggest student demonstrations since 1968, but they've been all over the country, even in states that are normally considered conservative, where nothing happens, and so on. Finally, we shouldn't also, my last point, we shouldn't look at this as just, okay, this is happening in Mexico. Mexico's a failed state with the drug cartels. I mean, the corruption and the rottenness of capitalism is in every single country in the world. In some cases, it's to a higher degree. In some other cases, to a lower degree. And I will say is a manifestation of the crisis of capitalism. The less productive investment there is for outlets for capitalism to invest, the more you see speculation, corruption of all sorts. I mean, in Spain, they just had a thing a week ago where 50 prominent politicians from all parties, local mayors, regional governors, been arrested over a corruption scandal which compounds on all the other corruption scandals. A recent opinion poll in Spain said that 95% of the people think that all politicians are corrupt, and they're quite close to the truth. Here in Britain, you see the scandals of the establishment covering up child sex abuse, this big scandal, and they can't even find anyone to head the Commission of Inquiry because they are all part of this corrupt, rotten establishment. And this is compounded on the scandal of the media, the scandals of the politicians' expenses, and all these things. The capitalist system is rotten. It's maybe more rotten in some countries than in others, or its manifestation is worse. But this is not separate. It's not something that's happening in a country far away. And finally, we should remember this. We should remember that at bottom, this is an issue of 43 students being disappeared against their will for their political activity. So this touches us very closely. We should also discuss during the discussion and in the sum up ways in which we can get more involved in the solidarity movement. We've already done something, but I think we should escalate this. And there's an International Day of Action on the 5th, which is Wednesday, that we should all be involved in. Thank you.